Ching ching. Keg-Filet TCG.
If you are new to the One Piece card game and feel overwhelmed with all of the cards and realize there are 7 sets, 1 extra booster, and 13 trial decks, I think this is the video for you. Who has the time to read through all of those cards? Well, this video is for those who are new to the game and want to know all the important cards for all the relative decks. In an effort to save you some time, you will realize that you do not need to learn every single card in this game. But if you did want to look through every single card in this game and look through a good One Piece database, go to eggmanevents.com, that's egg with 1 G, and go to their amazing deck builder. I am going to be reading through all the relative current decks and reading all their cards so you know what they do, and give a small explanation for why they're played. If you are an experienced player, you may find this video to be a little boring. But if you know someone who is new, maybe show them this video in order to help save them some time. Without further ado, let's get into the goop. First things first, big shout out to eggmanevents.com, and if you ever go to their events, you can find that they have a lot of good decks, especially where you can find the top decks currently. I am just going to be reading out all these cards out to you individually, starting from the most current decks up to maybe some older decks that are also good. First deck I'm going to be going over is Green Uta. I want to first read her leader skill and then go over her full deck. Now, this is not a guide for this specifically, but you can find guides also on YouTube. With that, the Green Uta leader is a 5k leader. She does get 5 life and Dawn ×1. So when you have 1 Dawn under her, when attacking, once per turn, you reveal the top card of your deck and reveal it. If it is a film type card, add it to your hand and then return the remaining card to the bottom of your deck. It's just saying that every turn when you swing with this, if you have a Dawn under it, you get to grab the top card of your deck if it is a film card. If it's not a film card, it just goes to the bottom. You are playing a lot of film cards. You are playing some cards that are not film cards, so this can sometimes whiff. And you might be thinking, well, why don't I just play only film cards? That's actually a really good idea, but there are some really, really good green cards. For the entire deck, you'll see that it has, again, a lot of film cards up top here, down here, and then events. This deck is kind of ran by events. I'm going to introduce the events first, and then the film cards, and then the cards that aren't film. So with this, there's New Genesis, which is activate main. So on your turn, you will activate it. If your leader is Uta, you will look at the top 3 cards of your deck. You reveal 1 film type card other than a New Genesis card. So it can be a character or a stage. And then add it to your hand. You will then return the remaining cards to the bottom of the deck in any order. Then you get that Dawn that you spent back as active. So you set the 1 back as active. The next event people play is Activate Main. If your leader is Uta, choose one of the below. You can rest up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 or less, or you can KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 or less. Now, this does cost you 2, and you get to discard the card for the event. It's pretty strong. And then finally, we have I'm Invincible. Pay 3, main, set up to one of your leader Uta as active. It does also have a trigger. You can give your power. Does also have a trigger where you can give up to one of your leader or character's power plus 1,000 for the turn. This card is a very strong finisher and will help you more in the later game. Next, we have a 2k power, 2 cost, 1k counter with blocker Bleno. This is just a blocker. All blockers will just, so you can rest it to attack into it when it's being attacked. Next we have is Chopper. Chopper is a 2 cost 2k. His skill is Dawn X1. When attacking, rest one of your opponent's characters at the cost of 2 or less. This card is strictly used as a 2k counter, so additional counter here, while also being a film type card. You will very rarely see this card on the field. Next we have a Dracul Mihawk. He is a 2k counter, a very good 2k counter, but he's mostly used for his other skill, which is on play if you have 2 or less character cards. So you can include him in that one. You can play up to 1 4 cost or lower of a Shigora Kingdom type or slash type character card other than a Dracul Mihawk from your hand rested. It's supposed to be a combo card that lets you be able to play a Brook from your hand, which is pretty strong, because Brook's going to be able to call you out other cards. This is usually used as a 2k counter, but most of the time on your 3 Dawn turn when you see this, this will cause a large gap where you're able to build a board so quickly on an early turn, which you will then combo, which I'm going to introduce you, Brook, one of the better cards actually in the deck. Brook is on play up to 1 film or Straw Hat Crew type character with a cost of 3 or less from your hand. So 1k counter, and the important thing is he has slash. That's probably the most important thing going forward with this card, because you can play out other cards and you can get this card played out with your Mihawk. Next, we actually have Uta. Uta's a 3 cost, 4k power, and it's a blocker. This is a blocker that says at the end of your turn, you may discard 1 event card from your hand and set up to 1 of your film type characters as active. This is supposed to be used in combination with another card, which I will introduce right now, which is Monkey D. Luffy. Now, as you see, kind of the strategy of this deck is to be throwing out cards. You'll put a card out that lets you call another card, and this is one of those, which is Monkey D. Luffy. He's a 7k power, cost 7. He is also a blocker, so he's really big defensively. And it says, on play up to 1 film or Straw Hat Crew type character with a cost of 4 or less from your hand. That even allows you to play things like a Brook out, which will be very strong, in which then you can play another 3 cost character like an Uta. Next, we actually have a Nami. This is kind of one of the key cards of the deck that lets you draw a lot of cards. And that's on play, and when attacking, you have to pay 1. You look at the 3 cards on top of your deck, and you reveal up to 1 film type card other than Nami and add it to your hand. Then you'll place the rest at the bottom of your deck in any order. So essentially this will let you draw a card almost every turn as long as you're paying 1, and ends up being kind of a menace. If you do see this, I would recommend trying to remove it if you're playing against it. Next, we actually have a Sanji. Sanji has 2k counter. This is why it's played in the deck, but it is a good body, which is a 4 cost, 5k. Dawn X1 on your turn. For every 3 rested Dawn on your field, this character gains 1k power. So it can get kind of large. It's not the most common thing it's used for, but it can get pretty big in those situations, but it's mostly used for a 2k counter. Next, we actually have Zoro. Zoro's just a vanilla 4 cost, 6k. It's just to have as a big body, and you can also get that out on a good turn, even playing it with Luffy, so you have that option. And the final card of this deck is actually Eustace Captain Kidd. This is kind of what the meta is. This used to be a very, very, very strong card. It is still a very strong card, but now it's a little bit more removable. But all it really is 8 cost, 8k power, Dawn X1 on your opponent's turn. If this character is rested, your opponent cannot attack anything other than characters named Eustace Captain Kidd. Only attack a Captain Kidd. Usually it's just going to be this one. Next is that second skill, because you need to get him rested when you play him, is activate main. Once per turn, you can rest this character, and you can play up to 1 character with the cost of 3 or less from your hand. So it allows you to play cards out like Uta, which is a blocker, or a Bleno, which is another blocker, because generally when you play this, you now have a base of 8k. Your opponent has to attack into an 8k character, which is pretty large. Having blockers is going to make it a lot easier so they don't just swing way over it. And the general strategy, if you're playing this deck or playing against this deck, is to play around 8-drop Kid, play a board that's very wide, where you're able to do a lot of attacks, and you're also going to be drawing a lot of cards. This is very simple for new players. The next deck is actually going to be Red Purple Law. It is sort of the menacing meta currently, and I'm going to go over all of its cards and plus a couple extra cards you may see in the future with this deck. Going over to leader first, he can play red and purple. He actually does start with 4 life, so he does have less life than Uta, if you've noticed. And his skill is activate main. Once per turn, Dawn -3. This is a cost, so you have to return 3 Dawn back from your deck. And return one of your opponent's characters with the cost of 3,000 power or less to the bottom of their deck. Then you can play 1 4-cost or lower character from your hand. So with that, as you can tell, it likes to remove things and then play things out. That's why it can be very strong. Now it needs combination pieces, which I'm going to read those out to you now. We first have Otama. It's a 1-cost, 0k power. It's a 2k counter, and on play you can give one of your opponent's characters -2,000 power during this turn. So it helps you combination and getting things lowered in power, so then you can remove it with your leader skill. Next we have Gordon, which is a 1-cost, 2k power, but it's activate main. You may return this card to the bottom of your deck, so you'll put this card to the bottom, that's its cost, and you can give up to one of your opponent's characters -3,000 power during this turn. Now Gordon doesn't have any counter, which is kind of rough, but it allows you to use your leader skill and remove things that are a little bit bigger. We also have Raise Max. Raise Max reads a little bit differently, but does the exact same thing as Gordon. You may place this character on the bottom of the owner's deck and give up to one of your opponent's characters -3,000 power during this turn. So it's essentially a carbon copy of the same card. Next we have is Tulip of Sanji. This is here just in case your opponent decides to not damage you at all. He's a 2k counter, and he's 2-cost, 3k power. Activate main. Once per turn, you may take the top card of your life into your hand, and during this turn it gets 2,000 power. Then give this character up to 2 of your rested Dawn. Generally you can attack with this and get really big numbers. Most of the time people use this card in order to just take their life, and that lets them essentially draw a card for the cost of a life. However, most of the time it is used as a 2k counter. Next we have is Shariah. He's a 3-cost, 4k blocker, and he does have a counter, which is great, but the main thing about him is he's a blocker. That's why we're playing him in this deck, and he has a very unique skill where when attacking or when you're blocking, once per turn, this character's base power becomes the same as the power of your opponent's leader until the start of your next turn. So in effect, you can block with this. If your opponent's leader is attacking, you copy that, and then you can counter out defending the card. So it ends up making pretty good use against leaders that attack really, really big. And if you're facing this card, you can play around it, but you almost have to attack just really low to make it not worth it for them to use their Shariah. It is a pretty strong card in this game. Next we have is Roronoa Zoro. He's a 3-cost, 5k power, and he just simply has a skill called Rush. This is the first time we're reading Rush in this video, and Rush just means this card can attack on the turn it is played. So it can attack the exact same turn. It is here to kind of just apply a little bit more pressure, because that's what this deck kind of needs. Next we have is Mr. 2 Bon Clay. He's a 4-cost, 1k power. Very big cost for a very little power unit. He does have a counter, and on play you can add 1 Dawn from your Dawn deck as active. So you add a Dawn like you just got it from the beginning of your turn. And then when you attack, you can choose one of your opponent's characters, and then that character becomes the same power as this one. So we actually get really strong And this character has the same base power as the chosen character for this turn. So if your opponent plays a lot of big characters, you're able to copy that and then use this to create a big swing on your opponent. Next, there's Ein. Ein is just a simple 4-cost 5k power, has no counter, but it says on play, add 1 Dawn card from your Dawn deck and rest it. So it lets you get a Dawn back. It's actually not as good as cards like Bon Clay, but it does have its uses, and that's why it's in here. Next, we have is Kid and Killer. It's a 4-cost 5k with Rush. So if you remember the Zoro that did have Rush, is now a different card with Rush, but he has an added ability. When attacking, if your opponent has 2 or less life, this character gains 2,000 power until the end of the turn. This can be a big finisher in most of the games. You'll probably see this if they are going for game. The next card is Sachi and Penguin. It's a 4-cost 5k, and it does have 2k counter, but don't get fooled. This card will be played most of the time in the early game. And it's just on play. If there are 3 or less Dawn on your field, you may add 2 Dawn from your Dawn deck and rest them. So the main thing is this is going to be used in conjunction with your leader skill, because you'll return Dawn. And then if you're at 3 Dawn, then you'll play this out. Very, very strong. Will be heavily used as a attacking unit. So it's not going to be just counter, but it can be. So making it one of the more struggling cards in this. The next card is actually Trafalgar Law. It's a 4-cost 5k body. It does have 1,000 power, and it is a blocker. But the specialty of this blocker is on play, you can Dawn -1. If your opponent has 7 or more cards in their hand, you may trash 2 cards from their hand, and that's just random 2 cards. When playing against purple, in general, I would suggest try to keep your hand in a safe place where you can not get hit by Trafalgar Law, or if it's okay to get hit by that, it's better to get hit by this than sometimes some powerful other abilities. The Dawn -1 does hurt Law over time, but the main thing is that this will end up being pretty effective against your opponent to make you lose cards. Next, we have another Trafalgar Law. A lot of people call this card Toy Law because he looks like a toy. He has 1k counter, and on play, give up to one of your opponent's characters -2,000 power during the turn. It's a lot like Otama, but it's now a 4k body, so it's like an extra Otama that it's able to attack later. Next, we have Vinsmoke Reiju, one of the stars of the game. It's a 4-cost 5k with 1,000 power. On play, if you have equal or less Dawn on your field than your opponent, and if you have 5 or less cards in your hand, you draw 2 cards. A lot of people call this card Pot of Greed, and it essentially lets you just draw a lot of cards. In order to get less Dawn than your opponent, you do have to Dawn minus at some point, and usually people call out that card while using Trafalgar Law's leader ability. It's just a good synergistic issue. The next card we're playing is Miss All Sunday. It's a 5-cost 5k power, and it just skill reads on play, add up to 1 rested Dawn to your cost area, and if you have 6 or more Dawn, you draw a card. So normally when you play this from your hand, you have 5 and you go up to 6, and you always get to draw a card if you play this normally. But it has another ability, which is just Trigger, where you can Dawn -2 and you get to play the card. And it really is a little strange because Dawn -2, but you're getting a Dawn back. So really it's Dawn -1. And it's kind of hard to get the draw off of it, but it is a very good body to get. I would say if you do see this card and you're playing it in your trigger zone, it can be a really good idea to trigger this if it's later in the game. It's not always the best idea to trigger this if it's too early in the game. But nevertheless, that's what Miss All Sunday does. Next, what we have is actually Eustace Captain Kidd. He is a 5-cost 6k blocker. Kind of funny, he's the only blocker in the game that doesn't have the reminder text. And once per turn, on your turn, when a Dawn card from your field is removed, you can add 1 Dawn and set it as active. So it combos with a lot of cards that Dawn minus, such as the leader. So when you play this and use your leader skill, you'll be able to just get a Dawn back and it lets you get back in a good spot. Next card we have is Queen. He's a 5 cost, 6k power, and he is also another blocker. And on play, Dawn -1. You can draw 2 cards and then trash 1 card from your hand. In most decks, this is just essentially draw 2, because a lot of the time you'll have a card that's really bad and you just need to get rid of it. In this deck, it has a lot of good cards where it might be a little strange to get rid of a card, but obviously it's a very big blocker, being a 5 cost 6k blocker, and it does draw you a lot of cards, which is very strong. The last card in this deck list specifically I want to go over is actually Fire Fist. And that is pay 2, a main, give up to one of your opponent's characters -4,000 power for this turn. Then, if your life has 2 or less, KO up to 1 of your opponent's cards at the cost of 0 or less power. And then trigger, just activate the main effect. So you can activate it, so it helps you get a -4,000 on one of your opponent's characters, which can be pretty strong. And the main issue with this card is just another kind of raise max, but it ends up being a little bit bigger. The second part of it, where it can KO a card, is relative very few times it is specifically used against a card called Rebecca, which we will definitely mention later. An honorable mention for this deck is actually Zoro Juro. You may see this card a lot more often. He's the 3 cost, 4k power, 1k counter, and when attacking, if you have 3 or less life, you can add up to 1 Dawn from your Dawn deck and set it as active. So you do have to have 3 life, which is pretty easy if you just get hit by the first attack, and you will get Dawn back. Ends up being pretty effective for this deck in the long run. The next deck I want to go over is Edward Newgate. Edward Newgate is a deck where you'll be able to go to a very lethal turn. Your aggression is actually paramount for this. You need to be very aggressive in attacking your opponent. You will not be able to go the distance with your opponent. You need to put them down in life as fast as possible. And that is because of the leader. I'm going to read all those now to you. The leader is Edward Newgate. He is the very unique leader. He has 6k power as his leading stat. And that is a lot bigger than every other leader in the game by 1,000 power. Now, at the end of your turn, you have to add 1 card from the top of your life area to your hand. Meaning, every turn you're just losing a life naturally. You will eventually go down to 0 life. Once you hit 0 life, you don't take any more life, but your opponent will be able to attack you. And if your opponent hits you when you're at 0 life, you lose. Now, Whitebeard does have 6 life, so now he gets an extra life to live a couple turns. So realistically, you have at least 5 turns in order not to lose, unless your opponent attacks you, which gets you more cards, and we'll go over a little bit of that strategy as well. For the 1-drop curve of the deck, I'm going to go over first Nami. They have a lot of searcher cards, and what this is, just a 1 cost 2k power. On play, look at the top 5 of your cards, reveal up to 1 Straw Hat type crew card other than a Nami, and add it to your hand. Then you'll place the cards on the bottom of your deck in any order you choose. A lot of people play Ezo, and Ezo is the deck that lets you pick up any Whitebeard Pirates card, but that's just an option. The next card is actually Nico Robin, and that's on play, KO up to one of your opponent's characters at the cost of 1 or less. Now, this card is usually just used because it's a Straw Hat, so it's searchable by Nami, and you can kill some pesky blockers that are really, really small. That's why this is here, but sometimes you can use this to attack later in the game, which I will show you in just a moment. Next card we have is Buggy. Buggy is a 1 cost 3k power. She's a little bit bigger than the other ones. And it says this character cannot be KO'd when battling slash attribute characters and leaders. So it does have an advantage against slash type characters. And its ability reads, on play, Look at 5 cards from the top of your deck, reveal up to 1 red event card, and add it to your hand. Then place the rest at the bottom of your deck in any order. You can tell this deck does play a lot of red events, and that looks like it's not going to whiff all that often. The final 1 cost of this is what brings this all together in this 1 cost entourage is Makino. She's a 2k counter, which also makes her really good. 1 cost that just says activate main. You may rest this character. Up to 1 of your red characters with the cost of 1 gains 3,000 power during this turn. So you can play this card, boost it up, and you can make your Nami from 2k to 5k with just 1 Dawn. Or your Buggies, 3k to 6k with just 1 Dawn. It's very, very effective, and you will be seeing this used in the later games where people have their Namis out and their Buggies and then just going with Makinos to try to end the game. Next card we actually have is Sanji. We read Sanji earlier. He's mostly here because he has Straw Hat Crew because he's searchable by Nami. Kid and Killer. Kid and Killer is, again, we read that earlier, but he's a 4 cost, 5k power. He does have Rush, and then if your opponent's at 2 or less life cards, this card gains 2k power until the end of turn. Next card we have is Marco. And there are 2 different Marcos, but we're going to go over this one. It's a 5 cost, 6k power, has 1,000 counter, and it says your turn, on play, you get to KO up to 1 of your opponent's characters with the cost of 3,000 power or less. And then when this character dies, so on KO, you can trash 1 event card from your hand, and you can play that character from the trash as rested, meaning it is really hard to get rid of if you were going to attack or remove it by using skills. Next we have is Monkey D. Luffy, 5 cost, 6k power, no counter. This character does have Rush, so it can attack the turn it's played, and with 2 Dawn, when attacking, your opponent cannot activate the blocker ability during this battle. Very strong finisher if your opponent plays a lot of blockers, and very needed in those dire situations. Next card is 2 Sanjis, and that's a 6 cost power with 6k and has 1k counter. If your opponent has a character with the cost of 5,000 power or more, this character gains Rush during the turn. So your opponent's playing the game and actually plays a character that has some power. This character is going to be able to come out and attack. Most of the time it's going to be a counter, but essentially it is a different version of Monkey D. Luffy most of the time. The final card in this deck is actually going to be Portgas D. Ace, and that is 7 cost, 7k power. And on play, you can give up to 2 of your opponent's characters minus 3,000 power during this turn. If your leader is a Whitebeard Pirate, this character gains Rush, so can attack. So it's going to be able to attack and reduce 2 characters by 3k power, which can be able to help remove and attack those characters. Generally, when this card is played down, it's going to be played and you're going to be using your other cards like your leader and the ace in order to help remove that card. A big honorable mention that most people play in all Edward Newgate decks, except for this one, is Edward Newgate is a 9 cost, 10k power, and a lot of Newgates play toward this, and it's on play. Up to 1 of your leader cards gains 2,000 power until the start of your next turn. Then, you cannot add a life card from your life area to your hand by your effect during this turn. So it negates your leader skill, which can definitely help if you're trying to not die. Next, also, Dawn times 2. When attacking, you get to KO up to 1 of your opponent's characters at the cost of 3,000 power or less, which is pretty strong. You won't use this very often, but it will come up in situations where you do need to remove some sort of nasty blocker. For the events in this deck, we first have Bad Manners Kick Course. You're going to see a lot of cards like this in a lot of decks where it's a 0 cost event and it has counter. You may trash this card from your hand and you have to actually trash another card from your hand. So you have to use another card in conjunction with this. You get up to 1 of your leader or characters plus 3,000 power during this battle. It does have a trigger if it does come out of your life. Give up to 1 of your opponent's leaders or characters minus 3,000 for this turn. Ends up making up for itself if you do see this card. Next card we have is actually Guard Point. Guard Point is a 1-cost event. Your leader or up to one of your characters gains 3,000 power during the battle. Now, if you hit this at a trigger, your leader or up to one of your characters gains 1,000 power during the whole turn, which can come up, but generally you're going to use this for the counter, and it's used in conjunction because you can't run more than 4 of Radical Beam, one of the strongest red cards, which is a 1-cost event, and it is counter. Your leader or one of your characters gains 2,000 power during the battle. Then if you have 2 or less life cards, that card gains an additional 2,000 power during this battle. Trigger, your leader or one of your characters gets 1,000 power during this battle. So to make that kind of shorter, you just get 4,000 power if you're at 2 or less life, when it ends up being very, very strong when you leave Dawn up at the end of your turn. Next card we actually have is Fire Fist. We read this earlier, but I'm going to read it again. Main, give up to one of your opponent's characters minus 4,000 power during this turn. Then if you have less than 2 cards in your life, to 2 cards or less, you K up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 0 or less. And you can activate that trigger from the trigger zone if that happens. And the last card, you haven't seen this in a very long time, actually. It's a 4-cost event. Main, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 6,000 power or less. And the trigger is activate this card's main effect. Gum Gum Jet Pistol was honestly the most frustrating card in OP01 for me. However, not bad here. It's really good tempo. It can make up for a lot of really gross things, but generally it's just an event that might be used if you see a buggy and you might pick it. The next deck is Gecko Moria. He is a black leader, and his theme is that he likes to play cards from his trash or his graveyard, and ends up being very efficient. Black is a color that likes to reduce the level of your opponent's characters and then use other abilities in order to KO your opponent's characters. So it's a lot of removal while also just being very effective at that removal. It is definitely a combo deck, but Gecko Moria lets you use the toolbox of your trash in order to do things what you want. First thing about him, he's a 5k leader. He does get 5 life. And with 1 Dawn, when attacking, you can pay 2. It's going to cost a total of 3. And you can discard 1 card from your hand. And you put the top 2 cards of your deck into the trash. And play 1 Thriller Bark Pirate cards with a cost of 4 or less from your trash. So it lets you call out cards from the trash, which you can, use because you discarded a card from your hand. Or potentially got them when you milled 2, and I'm going to use that word mill, by putting cards from your deck to the trash immediately. With those cards you can use in conjunction, you first have Absalom. Absalom's a 4-cost 5k power, it does have a 1k counter, and his ability is, on play, you may return 2 cards from your trash to the bottom of your deck in any order. KO up to 1 of your opponent's characters at the cost of 2 or less. The next card is actually 4-cost 5k Dr. Hogback, and his skill is, on play, return 2 cards from your trash to the bottom of your deck in any order, that's the cost, and put up to 1 Thriller Bark card other than a Dr. Hogback from your trash to your hand. So it allows you to add cards like Perona, or other 2k counters, or your big Thriller Bark cards, which I will go over very shortly. The last card you'll be able to call out with this leader ability is actually Perona. That's a 4-cost 5k, and she does have 2k counter, which is very strong, and is on play. If your opponent has 5 or more cards in their hand, they can choose one of the following below. Your opponent discards 1 card from their hand. So normally you'll be able to play this out early to make sure your opponent discards cards. And the second part is give up to one of your opponent's characters cost of -3 for the turn. Generally, this card is mostly used as a way to make your opponent discard cards most of the time, but you can use it with that utility of minusing a character in case you have a card to follow up to then KO them. As for the rest of the cards, we're going to go over first Victoria Sindri. She's a 2k counter, makes it very strong. Cost 1 of 2k power. On play, if your leader has Thriller Bark Pirates type, trash 5 cards from the top of your deck. So it allows your toolkit to start being used, as long as you hopefully see a card you need to see. Now, as far as the rest of the cards go, we do have Suru. She's a Navy type, that's why she's here. 1 cost, 0k power, and it says on play, for some reason it says replace on this, but on play, reduce by 2 the cost of up to 1 of your opponent's characters during this turn. So you choose a character and it's minus by 2, and only costs 1. Next, we have Branu. He's a Navy card. That's why he's here. It's a 2 cost, 3k power. On play, you look at the top 3 cards of your deck, reveal 1 Navy card from them other than a Branu, add it to your hand, and then trash the remaining cards. So it lets you search through your deck a little bit and build your trash at the same time. Next card we have is Helmeppo. He's a 2 cost, 3k power, and he's here because he likes to, on play, give it to one of your opponents minus 3 cost during this turn. Very great card to combo with a card I will show you later. And finally, some people do play Dashigi. She's mostly because she's the Navy 2k counter, but she's 3 cost, 4k, activate main. You may rest this character, give it to one of your opponent's characters minus 2 cost during the turn. So you can kind of use it over and over again in case they don't kill it. Next we have is Hina. She's a Navy card, but she's mostly because she's a 3 cost, 5k power. On play, give up to one of your opponent's characters minus 4 cost during this turn. Now Rebecca, this is going to be a long explanation for Rebecca. So it's just a 4 cost, 0k power, is 1000 counter, and she's a blocker, so she's a big blocker. And on play, you can return 1 black character other than a Rebecca with a cost of 3 to 7 from your trash to your hand. So you can grab a whole lot of cards from your trash. Then you can play 1 cost 3 or less character that is black from your hand to the field rested. So it comes in rested. This card is mostly used in conjunction to be playing either a Branu after to help you draw more cards, or by playing a Hina because you can grab the Hina and place it by minusing something by 4k power. Very great combo card, which you will see more of. Next is Rob Lucci. Ooh, Rebecca, Hina, Lucci. This is basically all the bread and butter you need. He's a 4 cost, 6k power. He doesn't have counter. He is a CP type, so he's not a Navy. And his skill is on play. You may place 3 cards from your trash to the bottom of your deck in any order. That's the cost of this. And then KO up to one of your opponent's characters with the cost of 2 or less, and another character with the cost of 1 or less. So it's going to KO 2 characters of specific cost. Generally, you'll combo this with other cards, which I'll explain now. There is a card called Great Eruption, which is soon to be banned very soon, and this just 1 cost event. Main, draw a card, then you give one of your opponent's characters minus 2 cost during the turn, which does have a trigger of your opponent trashes 1 card from their hand. And Ice Age, as an event for reduction, is just pay 1, give up to one of your opponent's characters minus 5 cost during the turn. It does have a trigger, which is KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 3 or less. The next card is Sabo. He's a 5 cost, 6k power with 1000 counter, and he is a blocker. And his on play ability, on the turn you play him, your characters cannot be KO'd by card effects until the start of your next turn, and you draw 2 cards and then trash 2 cards. So he gives you some cycle with drawing 2 and trashing 2. And on top of that, your whole board cannot be KO'd by effects, meaning it is very good against cards that like to KO, like Rob Lucci or Absalom. You'll be facing a lot of decks that like to KO even in red, as we found out. So it makes your deck very, very non-susceptible just losing based off of that. The final card, which is a very simple card, very not overpowered card, we're going to call it 8K 9,000 power, and that is Gecko Moria. That's on play. You choose up to 1 4 cost or less, and another card that's a cost of 2 or less from your trash. You get to play one of those standing and the remaining rested. So you can be able to call 2 cards. One has to be standing, one has to be rested. You can call, again, one that's a 4 cost or less or a 2 cost or less. This is used in every single black deck, and a lot of cards are going to be using it to draw a lot of cards. They'll play out things like Rebecca. They'll play out cards like Helmeppo, which will reduce the power of cards, and then Rob Lucci, which will then KO a number of cards. You also have Brand New. Brand New lets you draw cards, and then there's another card called Kuzan, which lets you draw another card. You'll see that now and then. You people play Hogback and Brand New. Sometimes you'll even see like a Sindri and a Rebecca. The options are pretty much endless, and you'll see this in cards like also Black Yellow Luffy, which we'll maybe go over in another video. The next deck I want to go over is Enel. There are a number of Enel builds, but you should kind of know what you're getting into if you're going to play this deck or play against it. And the main thing Enel likes to do, and it has 2 options. It can either be aggressive, which is kind of rare, but it can happen, or it can be very defensive because the leader ability and abuse its very strong cards that are very big, and just sort of play off of that to where your opponent can never really win the game. Now, Enel's skill is what allows him to get away with that, and his skill reads, he's a 5k power. He also has 4 life for being a 1 color leader, which is unique. And his skill is up on your opponent's turn, once per turn, when your life hits 0, you may add the top card of your deck to your life. Then discard 1 card from your hand. It always lets you get 1 life back when you're about to lose, and hopefully, let's say you go down to 0 life, you use other cards to get you back up in 1 life, so your opponent has to get through that little wiggle room. It makes it so when your opponent has to do 2 damage to you, now they have to do 3 damage, which is pretty frustrating. With this, a lot of people do play Charlotte Flampe. She's a 2k counter, 1 cost, and her skill is just reads, on play, you may add the top card of your life to your hand, and you can draw 1 card. It lets you take down your life, but it's going to be very efficient by drawing those 2 cards, essentially, because you don't really care to go down to 1 life early. The next card we have is Kazuki Hiyori. She's a 2k counter. That's the main reason why she's in here. But she just reads, on play, you may put the top or bottom card of your life pile into your hands. Then put up to 1 card from your hand on top of your life pile. This second part is actually optional, but most people will play down cards that are pretty effective, be called out from the life, which I will go over all those now. We first have Capone Beige. He is mostly here because of the trigger ability, but he is a 2k counter, and trigger up to 1 of your opponent's leaders or character cards cannot attack during this turn. So it essentially halts a full attack at all times at the end of a game. Very, very powerful, but generally used as a 2k counter if it's not in your life. But again, you can put cards into your life with Kazuki Hiyori. Next card is Kiko Nojo. She's a 4 cost, 6k power, and its skill reads, on KO, if your opponent's life is 3 or less, you get to place the top card of your deck to the top of your life. And the trigger is if your opponent has at 3 or less life, you get to play this card. So essentially, number 1, this card dies, you get to get a life back. Number 2, this card comes out of your life, you get to play it for free without having to discard a card for it. And being that it's very, very annoying for your opponent to deal with this card, and ends up being sort of a menace that wants to stay on the field and keep attacking. Another trigger card we are looking for actually is Shirahoshi, and her skill is just a 5 cost 0k. It's not a very big body at all, and It does have 1000k counter, so you do get some playability off it, but its skill reads, on play, you can draw 3 cards and trash 2 cards from your hand. If you remember from reading Queen earlier, when you draw a number of cards and you end up having a lot of bad cards in your hand, you can discard those bad cards, so it's kind of like you drew a lot of good cards. And the on-trigger ability is you get to just play the card right from the life, which ends up being a card you'll end up putting into your life very often with a couple other cards. The next card is actually going to be Gadatsu. If you're playing against Enel, you do kind of want to play around this card a little bit, and a lot of times you may not be able to because they're playing around their Gadatsu. And that skill is just 5 cost, 6k power, 1000 counter, on play, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with the cost of equal or less than their life. So you look at your opponent's life, you count how much life they have, and you can then KO a card with that life or less. Next card is Portgas D Ace. On play, if you have 2 or less life cards, this character gains Rush. As a 5 cost 7k power, this is pretty strong, and generally with Enel, you're going to be at lower life. There may be times where your opponent's not attacking you, so you may not be, but this is still a good baseline character to play down when being aggressive. The next card we have is actually Enel, 7 cost, 7k power, and he does also have Rush, so he can attack the turn he's played, but he does have a unique ability. Once per turn, if this character were to be removed from the field, you may trash the top card of your life instead. But if there is a character with Monkey D. Luffy on the field, this effect may not be activated. That is there for lore reasons, which is really funny. And there are a lot of good Monkey D. Luffy cards, but generally this card just means if you attack into it, they might just take their life instead, which they don't really care about, because they're going to be able to deal with that in the future. It's going to be a card that's just going to stay on the board unless you have a lot of removal against it. Next card is Charlotte's Katakuri, and it's 8 cost, 8k power. On play, you can put up to 1 character the cost of 8 or less on top or bottom of its owner's life area, and it has to go face up as well. So you choose either theirs or yours. A lot of times you will actually end up be putting your characters on top of your life in order to have unique triggers and just have that extra room so you can't die. And a lot of people like to put either their Flampeys on top of their life or maybe their Kiko Nojos, but the main card you're looking to put on top of your life is Shirahoshi if you have that available. The only other time you're not putting a card on top of your life is if your opponent has a character card that is pretty big and you need to remove it because of tempo reasons. And a lot of times it's going to be very effective with this Charlotte's Katakuri. Now, I do want to say, in the worst cases scenario, you can put this card on top of your life as it's being played. So you can play the card, choose this one, put it into your life. Kind of funny, but it can be done in really extreme circumstances. The last character card we have for this deck is Yamato. She's a 9 cost, 9k power. They put everything into this leader. On play, you get to KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost that's equal to or less than a total of you and your opponent's life combined. So let's say your opponent has 2 life and you have 1 life. Now you have 3 costs. You can KO a cost of 3 or less. And if you have 1 or less life, you may add up to 1 card from the top of your deck and add it to your life area. So, and a lot of times you'll end up playing this card over and over again. There is no searcher for this card in yellow currently, but generally this card is going to be played over and over and over again in the late game because it is a big body and it's going to gain you life and remove your opponent's cards. This deck likes to abuse Yamato. Not to its fullest, but definitely pretty well. The next card I want to go over is all the triggers, and that's first is You're the One Who Should Disappear. And it's a 0 cost event. Counter, you may trash 1 card from your hand, and your leader or up to one of your characters gets 3000 power for the turn. But it does have an additional ability, which is trigger if you have 0 life cards. Put the top card of your deck into your life pile. then trash 1 card from your hand. So it's kind of a last life ditched effort, which is pretty good when used with your leader ability. Next, we have 2 million volts Amaru. Main, up to one of your leaders or characters gains 3,000 power during the turn. Then, if you're at 1 or less life cards, rest up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. And again, this is a 2 cost event. It's going to rest your opponent's characters, and then the other ability is trigger. You may trash 2 cards from your hand, add up to 1 card from the top of your deck to your life. It kind of reminds you of actually this other card, but be costing 2 cards. I would only use this card in a last-ditched effort because the main skill is very, very strong. Next card is I Am God. It's a 4 cost event, and its main. You put 1, cost 7 or less, Enel from your hand or trash into play. Then you trash the top of your life card so your life total becomes 1. So it's a cheap way to play your 7-drop Enel. Now, it is going to cost you life, so you might lose a life or 2 from it. But it does have another trigger in case you hit this. And trigger, draw 2 cards, then trash 1 card from your hand. The next card is actually being banned very soon, but it just reads as Reject. It's a 4 cost event. You main, choose up to one of the following. You can KO up to one of your opponent's 5 cost or lower characters. And the next part is if your opponent has 1 life, you can then deal a damage to them. Then you get to add the top card of your life to your hand. It does have another ability which lets you trigger it just to draw 1 card. Reject is used as the finisher a lot of the time. Again, this card is being banned come June 21st. The last card of this deck is Rygo. And it's a 6 cost event, which is main, KO up to one of your opponent's characters. Then trash the top of your life card so your life becomes 1. And it kind of reminds you of this I Am God card, but Rygo, it just lets you do that. And then it does have a trigger. Trigger, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of equal to or less than your opponent's total life cards. Now this card is going to be very effective in Enel because you're okay being at 1 life. You may go down on 1 life half the time when using this, but it's going to be very good against decks that play really big cards because that is actually pretty good against Enel playing really big cards. And that's all the cards I want to read for this video. We did go all through those decks. I hope if you're a new player, you learned some things. You're able just to read through those with me along. If you like that video, let me know in the comments if that's something you're looking forward more to. I can do more of these, and I'm considering getting people that are maybe a little bit better with speaking to do some of these for you guys. Definitely let me know if that's something you're more interested in. You'd be watching that. But without that, I first want to say if you like the video, make sure you leave a like, subscribe if you want to see more, and leave a comment on the next decks that you maybe want to learn about. See you in the next video. Ciao.